Katherine Voss had faced enemy fire in 3 combat zones, but nothing prepared her for the cold stares in her hometown's American Legion Hall. "Women don't really understand military sacrifice," they said, dismissing her offer to speak at Memorial Day. They had no idea she was a decorated Marine colonel. They had no idea what she'd sacrificed. And they definitely had no idea who was about to walk into that ceremony and change everything forever. The rental car's GPS announced the turn, but Katherine Voss didn't need directions. She could navigate these streets blindfolded. 25 years away, and Cedar Falls looked exactly the same. Same faded stop signs. Same crack in the pavement on Maple Street. Same feeling that time had forgotten this place existed. She pulled into Cedar Hill Cemetery and parked near the old oak tree. Her hands stayed on the steering wheel longer than necessary. The engine ticked as it cooled. A cardinal called from somewhere overhead. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she walked between the headstones. Most were familiar names. The Hendersons. The Caldwells. People who'd watched her grow up, then watched her leave. Row after row of granite markers told the story of Cedar Falls families stretching back generations. Her father's grave sat in the veterans section, marked by a small American flag that snapped in the spring breeze. The headstone was simple black granite. Robert James Voss. Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army. Korea 1950-1953. Beloved Father. 1932-2018. Katherine knelt and brushed away winter's leftover leaves. "Hey, Dad." Her voice came out rougher than expected. "Sorry it took me so long to get back." She'd been in Afghanistan when he died. By the time she got the message and arranged emergency leave, the funeral was over. Her brother had handled everything. Another mission that came first. Another family moment she'd missed. "I finally retired." She touched the cold stone. 27 years, just like you said I would. Made colonel, too. You'd probably make some joke about me outranking you. The wind picked up, rattling the flag. Katherine stood and looked around the cemetery. So many veterans buried here. Men from World War II, Korea, Vietnam. A few newer graves from Iraq and Afghanistan. All of them had families who mourned them, remembered them, honored them. Mrs. Henderson said the town does a nice Memorial Day ceremony now, she continued. "I thought maybe I could help. Tell people about what service means. About what you taught me." A car door slammed in the parking lot. Katherine turned to see an elderly woman walking toward the newer section of the cemetery, carrying fresh flowers. The woman looked up and stopped. "Katherine? Katherine Voss?" "Hello, Mrs. Patterson." Katherine had hoped to avoid this conversation, at least for today. "My goodness, look at you. All grown up." Mrs. Patterson's eyes took in Katherine's simple jeans and sweater, looking for clues about the woman who'd left as an 18-year-old. "We heard you joined the military." "Yes, ma'am. Just retired actually." "How nice." The tone suggested it wasn't particularly nice at all. "Your father was so proud, though some folks wondered why a pretty girl like you would want to run off and play soldier." Katherine felt her jaw tighten, then forced it to relax. "Old habits. He supported my choice." "I'm sure he did." Mrs. Patterson shifted the flowers in her arms. "Well, I suppose everyone has to find their own way. You take care now." She walked away without waiting for a response. Katherine watched her go, remembering why she'd left this place and stayed away so long. Back at her father's grave, she pulled a small medal from her pocket. Bronze star with a V for valor. One of several decorations she'd earned in places she couldn't talk about, doing things these people would never understand. Some fights are worth having, even when you're outnumbered. She could almost hear his voice saying it. He'd told her that the night before she left for boot camp, when half the town thought she was making a mistake. Katherine placed the medal at the base of the headstone, then stood and saluted. Sharp, crisp, perfect. The way he'd taught her when she was 7 years old, practicing in their backyard. The drive to the riverside bed and breakfast took 10 minutes. The same Victorian house where her high school class had held their 10-year reunion. The same one she'd skipped because she was deployed somewhere classified. The owner, Mrs. Chen, looked up from her computer as Katherine entered. "You must be our afternoon check-in. Welcome to Cedar Falls." "Thank you. I have a reservation under Voss." "Voss?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted slightly. "Are you related to Bob Voss? The one who passed a few years back." "He was my father." "Oh my." Mrs. Chen studied her more carefully now. "You're the daughter who went off to the military. I remember hearing about that. How interesting that you've come back." Katherine took the room key in her small suitcase. "Just for a few days. For Memorial Day." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Well, I suppose everyone's welcome to visit. Even girls who run off to play soldier." The words followed Katherine up the narrow staircase to her room. She sat on the bed and looked out the window at the town square, where workers were already setting up for tomorrow's Memorial Day ceremony. Tomorrow, she'd try again to honor her father's memory and maybe find a way to belong in the place she'd once called home. The American Legion Hall smelled like cigarette smoke and burnt coffee, just like Katherine remembered. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across folding tables arranged in a square. A dozen people sat around them, papers scattered between coffee cups and ashtrays. Katherine recognized most of the faces, though they'd aged considerably. Bill Henderson still had that salesman's smile, even with gray hair now. Margaret Caldwell sat straighter than a church pew, her disapproving expression unchanged since Katherine's high school days. And at the head table sat Tom Richards, his Vietnam veteran's cap tilted just so, clearly running the show. "Excuse me," Katherine said from the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I was hoping to speak with whoever's organizing tomorrow's ceremony." All conversation stopped. Tom Richards looked up from his clipboard, squinting through reading glasses. "Help you with something, miss? I'm Katherine Voss. I wanted to offer my assistance with Memorial Day. My father's buried in the veterans section, and I thought..." "Voss?" Margaret Caldwell's voice cut through the silence. "You're Bobby Voss's daughter. The one who left for the military." "Yes, ma'am. I recently retired in..." "Retired?" Bill Henderson leaned back in his chair. "How old are you, honey? 35? 40? 43. I served 27 years. Tom Richards removed his glasses and studied her. 27 years. What did you do, typing up reports somewhere? Katherine kept her voice steady. I was a Marine Corps officer. I'd like to participate in tomorrow's ceremony, maybe share what service meant to my father and our family. A few people around the table exchanged glances. Tom Richards set down his glasses and folded his hands. Well now, Katherine, we appreciate your enthusiasm. But this ceremony is for the community to honor real veterans. Men who saw real combat, made real sacrifices. We've got Bill's father-in-law speaking. He was at Normandy. That's wonderful. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just thought. The thing is, Margaret Caldwell interrupted, most folks here understand that women don't really know what military sacrifice means. Not like the boys who came home from Vietnam or Korea or the Big War. Katherine felt heat rising in her chest but kept her hands relaxed at her sides. I understand. I was simply hoping to honor my father's memory. Your daddy was a good man, said an older woman Katherine didn't recognize. Fought in Korea, came home, raised his family. That's the kind of sacrifice we're talking about. Tom Richards nodded. Exactly, Dorothy. The real deal. Not someone who spent their career in some cushy assignment stateside. He looked at Katherine. No offense, but there's a difference between playing at war and the real thing. I never said I. Look, sweetheart, Bill Henderson's salesman charm kicked in, maybe you could help Margaret with the refreshments? We could always use another pair of hands setting up the folding chairs. Margaret Caldwell smiled thinly. That would be perfect. We need someone to arrange the flowers too. Much more suitable. Katherine looked around the table. A few people wouldn't meet her eyes. Others nodded agreement with the committee leaders. Only one man, sitting in the back corner, seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I see, Katherine said finally. Would it be possible for me to simply attend? As a family member of a veteran? Tom Richards waved his hand dismissively. Course. Public ceremony. Anyone can sit and listen. Just, well, you understand. The speaking parts are for people who really understand what they're talking about. People who've been there, Margaret added. Who've seen what war really looks like. Katherine stood quietly for a long moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Thank you for your time, she said. She turned and walked toward the door, hearing whispered conversations resume behind her. Just before she reached the exit, Tom Richards called out. Katherine? Nothing personal, you understand. We just want to keep things authentic. She paused without turning around. I understand completely. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her flushed face. She walked slowly across the parking lot, past the war memorial that stood in front of the Legion Hall. Black granite, maybe 8 feet tall, with names etched in gold lettering. Her father's name was there, third column from the left. Robert J. Voss, Korea. Katherine reached out and touched the letters. The stone felt cold under her fingertips. Authentic, she whispered. She'd earned 3 bronze stars, a silver star, and a purple heart. She'd led Marines in combat in 3 different countries. She'd made decisions that saved lives and carried the weight of ones that didn't. But to these people, she was still just Bobby Voss's daughter who ran off to play soldier. A car pulled into the parking lot behind her. Footsteps approached on the gravel. Ma'am? Katherine turned. It was the man from the back corner of the meeting, the one who'd looked uncomfortable. He was maybe 60, wearing a faded army jacket. I'm sorry about that, he said. That wasn't right. It's fine. No, it's not. He extended his hand. Jim Morrison. I did 2 tours in Iraq with the Guard. That was bullshit in there, and I wanted you to know not all of us think that way. Katherine shook his hand. Thank you. For what it's worth, I'd like to hear what you have to say tomorrow. About your father, about service. Tom Richards doesn't speak for all of us. Jim Morrison walked back toward the Legion Hall, leaving Katherine alone with her father's name carved in stone and the weight of tomorrow's ceremony pressing down on her shoulders. Katherine woke to the sound of church bells and lawnmowers. Sunday morning in Cedar Falls looked exactly like she remembered. From her bed and breakfast window, she could see families walking to early service, children in their best clothes trailing behind parents who moved with the unhurried pace of small-town routine. She dressed in khakis and a simple blue sweater, then walked downtown for coffee. The morning air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and bacon from the diner down the street. Miller's coffee shop occupied the same corner it had for 40 years. The same red vinyl booths, same cracked linoleum floor, same handwritten menu board behind the counter. Katherine ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin from a teenager who couldn't have been born when she left town. She chose a booth near the back and pulled out the morning paper. The Memorial Day ceremony made the front page of the Cedar Falls Gazette, complete with a photo of Tom Richards adjusting the microphone at the war memorial. Excuse me, but aren't you Katherine Voss? Katherine looked up to see 2 women about her age, coffee cups in hand. She recognized them vaguely from high school. Yes. I'm Nancy Peterson. Used to be Nancy Mills. We had biology together senior year. Of course. How are you? Nancy slid into the booth across from her. The other woman remained standing, looking uncomfortable. We heard you were back for Memorial Day. That's nice. Are you planning to visit with the ceremony committee? I spoke with them yesterday. Oh. Nancy's smile flickered. How did that go? Before Katherine could answer, she heard her name mentioned at the counter. Two men in work clothes were paying for coffee, their voices carrying across the small restaurant. That Voss girl trying to horn in on the veterans ceremony, one said. My dad fought in the Pacific. Real fighting, not whatever games they play nowadays. Tom Richards told my wife she wanted to give a speech, the other replied. Can you imagine? Someone who probably never saw a day of combat trying to tell us about sacrifice. Nancy's cheeks reddened. Don't mind them. Not everyone feels that way. But Katherine was listening to the conversation at the next booth, where an elderly couple shared Sunday breakfast. I remember when she left, the woman whispered. Caused such a stir. Her poor father, trying to explain why his daughter wanted to be a soldier. Different times now, the man replied. Women doing all sorts of things they didn't used to do. Still seems unnatural to me. War is men's business. Katherine set down her coffee cup. Nancy reached across the table and touched her arm. People talk. You know how small towns are. I remember. Katherine finished her coffee and left money on the table. Outside, she walked toward Henderson's Hardware, needing batteries for her camera. She wanted pictures of her father's grave, something to remember this visit by. The hardware store smelled like motor oil and sawdust. Bill Henderson stood behind the counter, helping a customer with paint samples. He looked up when the bell above the door announced her arrival. Well, if it isn't our visiting dignitary, he said loud enough for other customers to hear. You find everything you need yesterday at the Legion Hall? Yes, thank you. Katherine found the battery display and picked up what she needed. At the counter, Bill Henderson rang up her purchase with exaggerated attention to detail. For AA batteries. That'll be $647. He paused. You know, my father-in-law is speaking tomorrow. Harold Brennan. He was at Omaha Beach, saw real action. Lost 3 fingers to German shrapnel, still has nightmares 60 years later. That's the kind of sacrifice folks here understand. I'm sure he has important stories to share. Indeed he does. Real stories. From real battles. Bill handed her the change. Not everyone can say that, of course. Katherine pocketed the batteries and headed for the door. Behind her, she heard Bill tell another customer, some people think all military service is the same thing. But those of us with family members who saw real combat know better. The library offered sanctuary. Mrs. Goldman, the librarian since Katherine was in elementary school, looked up from her desk with genuine warmth. Katherine Voss. I heard you were back. Look at you, all grown up and distinguished looking. Hello, Mrs. Goldman. You look exactly the same. Flattery will get you everywhere. The older woman came around her desk. I was so sorry about your father. He used to come in here every week, checking out military history books. He was so proud of you, talked about your promotions, your assignments. Well, what he was allowed to talk about anyway. Katherine felt her throat tighten. He never mentioned that. Oh my, yes. My daughter the Marine officer, he'd say. She's serving her country just like I did. Some people in town didn't understand, but Bobby never wavered. He knew you were doing something important. They talked quietly for 20 minutes about books and memories. When Katherine left, Mrs. Goldman pressed an old photo into her hand. From the high school newspaper. Your father at your graduation ceremony. He looked so proud in his dress uniform. Walking to the grocery store, Katherine passed the elementary school playground where she'd learned to throw a baseball and skin her knees. A group of children played on the swings, their laughter carrying on the afternoon breeze. Inside Miller's Market, she picked up bottled water and granola bars. At the checkout, the young cashier looked at her receipt. Katherine Voss? Are you related to the soldier buried in the cemetery? He was my father. Cool. My brother's in the army. He's deployed in Germany right now. The teenager lowered his voice. My mom heard you were in the military too. That's awesome. Most people around here think only guys can be real soldiers. Your brother's doing important work. Yeah. He wants to make a career of it, like you did probably. Behind her in line, an older woman made a disapproving sound. Katherine paid for her items and left without looking back. The sun was setting when she returned to the bed and breakfast. Mrs. Chin was watering flowers on the front porch. How was your day exploring our little town? Educational. I imagine so. Mrs. Chin moved to the next planter. Small towns have long memories, you know. People here remember when you left, remember the talk it caused. Your father defending his choice to let his daughter join the Marines. It was my choice. Of course it was. But parents get blamed for their children's decisions, don't they? Mrs. Chin straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. Bobby Voss was a good man. Served his country, raised his family, minded his own business. Some folks thought he should have talked you out of leaving. Katherine climbed the porch steps. And what did you think? I thought he raised a daughter brave enough to serve her country. Not everyone would see it that way, but that's what I thought. Inside her room, Katherine sat by the window overlooking the town square. Workers had finished setting up for tomorrow's ceremony. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a small stage decorated with red, white, and blue bunting, the war memorial standing silent guard over it all. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Heard you're back in town. If you need backup tomorrow, just say the word. Some of us remember what honor looks like. J. Morrison. Katherine typed back, thank you. I think I can handle it. But as she looked out at the ceremony setup and thought about the conversations she'd heard all day, she wondered if she really could. Katherine woke before her alarm. Gray clouds pressed down on Cedar Falls, and rain tapped against her window like impatient fingers. She dressed carefully in her navy blue suit, the one she'd worn to retirement ceremonies and military funerals. At her throat, she pinned her father's Purple Heart, the only visible sign of the military world she'd left behind. The coffee shop was busy with early risers heading to the ceremony. Katherine ordered her usual black coffee and noticed how conversations quieted when she entered, then resumed in whispers after she passed. She took her coffee to go and walked through the light rain toward the town square. Workers were making last-minute adjustments to the folding chairs, now arranged in perfect rows facing a small stage. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the gazebo, wilting slightly in the damp air. The war memorial stood at the center of it all, its black granite surface streaked with raindrops. Katherine found a seat in the back row, far from the reserved section marked with American flags. She sipped her coffee and watched Cedar Falls wake up around her. Families arrived in Sunday clothes, parents carrying umbrellas and children clutching small flags. Veterans wore their service caps and unit pins, gathering in small groups to share quiet conversations. Tom Richards stood near the stage, clipboard in hand, directing the setup with military precision. He wore his dress uniform from Vietnam, ribbons bright against the green fabric. Margaret Caldwell arranged flowers near the podium while Bill Henderson tested the microphone, his voice echoing across the square. Good morning, Cedar Falls. Can everyone hear me back there? A few people nodded. Katherine remained silent in her back row seat. At 9 o'clock sharp, Tom Richards stepped to the microphone. The scattered conversations gradually died down as people found their seats. Katherine counted maybe 200 attendees, mostly older residents with a scattering of younger families and a dozen veterans in uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cedar Falls' annual Memorial Day ceremony. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The crowd stood as one, hands over hearts, voices joining in familiar words. Katherine's military posture was automatic, spine straight, eyes fixed on the flag hanging limply in the still air. Please remain standing for our national anthem, performed by the Cedar Falls High School Choir. 20 teenagers in white shirts and dark pants filed onto the stage. Their voices rose clear and strong, carrying across the square despite the weather. Katherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always came with the anthem, the weight of all the places she'd heard it played, all the ceremonies where it marked both celebration and loss. As the last notes faded, Mayor Patricia Walsh took the microphone. She was new since Katherine had left town, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a politician's practiced smile. Thank you all for joining us this Memorial Day morning. We gather not just to remember our fallen heroes, but to honor all who have served our great nation. Her eyes swept the crowd. Today we have the privilege of hearing from one of our most distinguished local veterans. Katherine shifted in her seat as Tom Richards approached the microphone again. Thank you, Mayor Walsh. Folks, it's my honor to introduce the men who made this ceremony possible. These are the real veterans, the ones who understand what sacrifice truly means. He gestured toward the front row where several elderly men sat with their wives. Bill Henderson's father-in-law, Harold Brennan, served with the 1st Infantry Division at Omaha Beach. George Patterson flew bomber missions over Germany. Frank Mueller survived the Bataan Death March. Applause rippled through the crowd. Katherine clapped along, genuinely respecting these men's service. These heroes, Tom Richards continued, they know what war looks like. They've seen real combat, made real sacrifices. They understand that freedom isn't free, that some of us have paid the price so others don't have to. His voice grew stronger, more pointed. In today's world, everyone wants to call themselves a veteran. Everyone wants to claim they understand military service. But those of us who've been there, who've seen the elephant, we know the difference between playing at war and the real thing. Katherine felt heat rising in her cheeks. Around her, she heard murmurs of agreement from some audience members, uncomfortable shifts from others. So today we honor authentic military service. The kind that leaves scars. The kind that wakes you up at night. The kind that only real combat veterans can truly understand. Harold Brennan, a frail man in his 90s, struggled to his feet with his wife's help. His voice was thin but steady as he spoke into the microphone about D-Day, about watching friends die on the beaches of Normandy, about carrying guilt and pride for 60 years. His words were powerful, genuine, earned through blood and sacrifice. Katherine found herself moved by his courage, both then and now in sharing his story. George Patterson followed, describing the terror and determination of flying bombing missions over Nazi Germany. His hands shook as he gripped the microphone, but his voice remained strong. After each speech, Tom Richards returned to the microphone with comments about real veterans and authentic sacrifice, each phrase landing like a small slap across Katherine's face. During a brief pause for flower laying, Katherine noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A man in dress blues stood near a tree, partially hidden by shadows. Something about his bearing caught her attention, but she couldn't make out his face from this distance. Tom Richards announced the final portion of the ceremony. We'll now have our traditional moment of silence, followed by taps and the closing remarks. The crowd bowed their heads. Katherine closed her eyes and thought about her father, about the Marines she'd served with, about the weight of command and the cost of decisions made in impossible circumstances. When the moment ended, Tom Richards looked out over the assembly. Before we close, I want to remind everyone what this day means. It's about honoring those who truly served, who made real sacrifices, who understand the price of freedom. He paused, his eyes finding Katherine in the back row. It's not about everyone who wore a uniform. It's about those who bled for this country, who faced death for our freedom. That's what authentic military service looks like. Katherine felt every eye in the crowd turn toward her. The message was clear, public, and deliberate. She stood slowly, her father's purple heart catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Her voice carried clearly across the sudden silence. Excuse me. Tom Richards looked startled. Ma'am, we're just finishing up here. I'd like to say something about my father. About Sergeant First Class Robert Voss. I think we've heard enough for today. We need to wrap things up. Katherine stepped forward, moving between the chairs toward the stage. It will just take a moment. The crowd stirred uneasily. Tom Richards glanced at Margaret Caldwell, who shook her head slightly. Other committee members looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I really think. Please. Catherine's voice remained steady, but something in her tone made Tom Richards pause. Just a few words about what my father taught me about service and sacrifice. Tom Richards looked around the crowd, clearly wishing this moment would disappear. Finally, he stepped aside from the microphone. Keep it brief. Katherine walked to the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations, feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. As she reached for the microphone, she noticed the man in dress blues had moved closer, though his face remained in shadow. She looked out at the crowd, seeing skeptical faces mixed with curious ones, Tom Richards' disapproving glare, Margaret Caldwell's pursed lips. "Thank you," she said simply, and began to speak about the father who had shaped her understanding of honor, duty, and sacrifice. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. The crowd sat in uncomfortable silence, a few people checking their watches. Tom Richards stood to the side, arms crossed, his expression making it clear this interruption was unwelcome. "My father, Sergeant First Class Robert Voss, served in Korea from 1950 to 1953. Catherine's voice was steady, carrying clearly across the square despite the gray morning air. He never talked much about what he saw there. Like many veterans, he carried those memories quietly. She looked out at the faces watching her. Some showed polite attention, others barely concealed impatience. When I was 7 years old, he taught me to salute in our backyard. I asked him why it mattered, and he said, "Katie, when you salute someone, you're not just showing respect for them. You're showing respect for everyone who served before you, and everyone who'll serve after you." A few older veterans in the crowd nodded slightly. Katherine noticed Jim Morrison sitting in the middle section, his face encouraging. "My father worked at the grain elevator for 30 years after he came home. He coached Little League, served on the volunteer fire department, never missed a day of work. He understood that service comes in many forms." Margaret Caldwell shifted in her front row seat, glancing at her watch. He also understood something else. He knew that protecting freedom meant protecting everyone's right to serve their country, regardless of whether others thought they belonged. Catherine's voice grew stronger. "When I told him I wanted to be a Marine, some people in this town said he should talk me out of it. Said war was no place for a woman." Tom Richards cleared his throat pointedly. Katherine continued without acknowledging him. "But my father said, if my country needs you, and you're willing to serve, then you serve. That's what Americans do." She paused, looking directly at Tom Richards. "He taught me that real patriots don't get to choose who's worthy of wearing the uniform." The crowd stirred uneasily. A few people in the back rows sat forward, paying closer attention now. "My father never lived to see me retire, but I know he would have been proud. Not because I was his daughter, but because I did my duty. The same way every veteran here did theirs, regardless of where they served or what they faced." Katherine stepped back from the microphone, the speech she'd planned to give about sacrifice and honor cut short by the weight of the moment. Polite applause began to ripple through the crowd. Then a voice called out from the back. "Colonel Voss?" Every head turned. The man in dress blues stepped forward from the shadows, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Navy Master Chief James Morrison, his weathered face unmistakable, his chest full of ribbons catching the dim light. "Reaper?" The nickname slipped out before Katherine could stop it. Master Chief Morrison walked between the chairs with measured steps, his dress uniform immaculate despite the damp weather. The crowd parted instinctively, recognizing the authority in his bearing even if they didn't understand his rank. He stopped 10 feet from the stage and came to perfect attention. His salute was crisp, respectful, and held longer than regulation required. "Colonel Katherine Voss, United States Marine Corps," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. Katherine returned his salute, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Master Chief Morrison. What are you doing here? Heard through the grapevine that one of the finest officers I ever served with was in town. Thought I'd pay my respects." He turned to address the crowd, his voice commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea who just spoke to you. Tom Richards stepped forward. Now wait just a minute. Master Chief James Morrison, United States Navy SEALs, retired, Morrison announced, cutting him off. And I'm here to tell you about Operation Golden Eagle, Afghanistan, 2019. A murmur ran through the crowd. Afghanistan. The name carried weight, even for people who'd never left Cedar Falls. Morrison's eyes found Tom Richards. Your committee chairman here has spent the morning talking about real combat, real sacrifice. Well, let me tell you what real looks like. He gestured toward Katherine. Colonel Voss was the mission commander for a classified operation to extract a captured Navy SEAL team from Taliban-controlled territory. My team. My boys. The square had gone completely quiet. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. We were pinned down for 18 hours. Outnumbered, outgunned, no way out. The brass said extraction was impossible. Too dangerous. Too many variables. Morrison's voice grew harder. Colonel Voss said she didn't care about impossible. She said Marines don't leave people behind. Katherine felt her chest tightening. She hadn't talked about that mission with anyone outside official debriefings. She coordinated air support, ground forces, and medical evacuation from a forward operating base while taking mortar fire. For 6 hours, she ran that operation under enemy attack, never leaving her post, never losing focus. Morrison looked directly at Tom Richards. You want to talk about real sacrifice? Colonel Voss flew into that valley in the lead helicopter, knowing she might not come out. She personally supervised the extraction of my wounded team members while Taliban fighters closed in. The crowd was transfixed. Margaret Caldwell's mouth hung slightly open. Bill Henderson had stopped pretending to organize papers. When we got back to base, I asked her why she risked everything for a SEAL team she'd never met. You know what she said? Morrison's voice softened slightly. My father taught me that when Americans are in trouble, you go get them. That's what we do. He paused, letting the words settle over the assembly. Colonel Voss has 3 bronze stars, a silver star with V device for valor, and a purple heart from wounds she took that day. She's commanded Marines in 3 combat zones and saved more American lives than most people in this crowd will ever know. Morrison turned back to Katherine, his expression shifting from official to personal. But more than that, she's the kind of leader who inspires everyone around her to be better than they thought they could be. Marines, sailors, soldiers, it didn't matter. If Katherine Voss was running the mission, you knew someone was going to bring you home. Tom Richards stood frozen, his face pale. Around the square, people were getting to their feet. First the younger veterans, then the older ones, then family members and civilians who understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Morrison stepped closer to the stage. Colonel, would you do me the honor of accepting the thanks of a grateful nation, and the respect of everyone here who understands what real service looks like? Katherine stepped down from the stage, tears now flowing freely. Morrison took her hand in both of his. It's good to see you, ma'am. The Corps didn't know what it was losing when you retired. Behind them, the entire crowd had risen to their feet, a spontaneous standing ovation that echoed across the town square and marked the moment when Katherine Voss finally came home. The applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Katherine stood beside Master Chief Morrison, overwhelmed by the sound of 200 people showing respect she'd never expected to receive in her hometown. When the clapping finally died down, Tom Richards approached with his hat in his hands. Colonel Voss, His voice broke slightly. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. A big one. Katherine looked at the man who'd dismissed her service just hours earlier. His face was red with shame, his military bearing deflated. We all serve in different ways, Tom. Your service in Vietnam matters too. But what I said, what I implied about your service. He shook his head. There's no excuse for that kind of ignorance. Margaret Caldwell stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. Katherine, dear, I am so sorry. We had no idea. We should never have spoken to you that way. You didn't know. People make assumptions. That's not good enough, Margaret said firmly. We should have listened. We should have shown respect. Bill Henderson joined them, his salesman's smile replaced by genuine remorse. Colonel, would you consider speaking at our Veterans Day ceremony? And maybe at the high school? These kids need to hear what real service looks like. Master Chief Morrison stepped beside Katherine. If I may interrupt, I'd like to escort the Colonel to visit the War Memorial. They walked together to the black granite wall where her father's name was etched. Morrison read the inscription aloud. Robert James Voss. Korea. Your dad would be proud, ma'am. Katherine touched her father's name on the stone. He always said the best way to honor veterans was to serve something bigger than yourself. Sounds like he raised you right. Jim Morrison from the American Legion approached them, grinning widely. Colonel, I hope you'll forgive our committee's behavior. Would you consider joining us next year? As honorary chairperson? I'd be honored. And maybe we could arrange for some of your fellow Marines to participate? Show folks what modern military service really looks like. Katherine smiled. I know some people who might be interested. An elderly woman Katherine didn't recognize tapped her on the shoulder. Excuse me, dear. I'm Dorothy Patterson. I wanted to thank you. My grandson is thinking about joining the Army, and after hearing you today, well, I understand better what that means. Throughout the afternoon, people approached Katherine. Some apologized, others simply thanked her for her service. Parents asked about military careers for their children. Young veterans sought her advice about leadership and transitioning to civilian life. As the crowd began to disperse, Master Chief Morrison walked with Katherine back toward the bed and breakfast. How did you know I was here? She asked. Small world. One of my former teammates lives in Springfield, heard about the ceremony through his wife's sister. When he mentioned your name and the trouble you were having, I figured you could use some backup. I'm glad you came. They stopped in front of the War Memorial one more time. Katherine looked at her father's name, then at the names of all the other veterans from Cedar Falls who'd served their country. You know what the best part of today was, she said. What's that? Those World War II veterans who spoke. Harold Brennan, George Patterson. Their stories matter. Their sacrifice was real. Nothing about what happened today takes away from what they did. Morrison nodded. True patriots make room for everyone who serves. That evening, Katherine sat in the town diner with Morrison, sharing coffee and pie. The same diner where she'd overheard criticism just days before was now filled with people who stopped by their table to shake her hand and thank her for her service. Tom Richards appeared at their table, looking nervous. Colonel, I wanted to ask. Would you be willing to help us plan next year's ceremony? Make sure we honor all veterans properly? I think that's a good idea, Tom. As they prepared to leave, Katherine noticed a young girl, maybe 8 years old, approach their table shyly. Ma'am? My daddy says you're a real Marine. Is that true? Yes, it is. Could girls like me be Marines too? Katherine knelt down to the girl's eye level. If you work hard, study hard, and never give up on your dreams, you can be anything you want to be. Even a Marine. The girl beamed and ran back to her parents. Walking to her car, Katherine felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she was home. Master Chief Morrison shook her hand goodbye. It's been an honor serving with you again, Colonel. Same here, Master Chief. Thank you for having my back. Marines and SEALs, ma'am. We take care of our own. Katherine drove slowly through Cedar Falls one more time before heading to her hotel. The town looked the same as when she'd arrived, but everything had changed. Her father's name on the memorial wall meant something different now. Her service meant something different. At her father's grave, she placed her bronze star beside his headstone and whispered, "Mission accomplished, Dad." The next morning, Katherine called the high school principal to volunteer for Career Day. Cedar Falls had given her something she'd been searching for without knowing it. They'd given her the respect she'd earned and the welcome home she'd always deserved. If Catherine's story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage and honor.